I'm getting old, but I'm feeling good, even though it hurts sometimes. I'm feeling good. What does that mean, feeling good? What does it mean to have health? You know, if you look at the dimensions of health, there's physical, emotional, psychological, social, spiritual, and intellectual. And science and medicine has been waking up to this interdependent equilibrium of process. It's called homeostasis, and it's there in ecology and in nature. It's in our bodies. Homeostasis is this balance or equilibrium between different independent elements. All your organs in your body, they're all pulling at each other, and when they're balanced, they're at ease. You have health. When they're not balanced, well, what you have is dis-ease. Homeostasis, any self-regulating process by which an organism tends to maintain stability while adjusting to conditions that are best for its survival. Adjusting and adapting. Those are two words that at least I'm going to use a lot of. Now, for those of you who have been hanging with here at the deep end with myself, I'm Red Hawk, and I'm here with Marianne Rudis and Bob Hayes. If you followed our paradigms, models, and understandings of how we got here, once we're here, how do we balance? How do we keep an even keel, if you will? And that's what the whole science of well-being, which has emerged through everything from humanistic psychology and medicine and a broader understanding of the complexity of what health is and what wholeness is. Wholeness. If you look up wholeness, you get things like complete. It's the undivided or unbroken completeness or totality with nothing wanting. Yet, here's the gig. It's kind of like nirvana. You know, you want nirvana, you do everything, but the last thing that has to go to get to nirvana is your desire for nirvana, because it's a process. It's a process. So how do we talk about health and wholeness and this process? If you look at the understanding of health and wholeness, a guy named Dawsey says, it is understanding and connecting to the many sides of yourself, leading to a deep understanding and acceptance of your inner wisdom and finding the balance that supports your life. Well, that's pretty big, but that's a process. And what has happened over the last 100 years, or at least 50 years, is we've moved health to our understanding of health beyond the absence of pathology. Again, with humanistic psychology, people like Abraham Maslow, Carl Rogers, Viktor Frankl, Alan Watts, these people showed that there's a wholeness aspect to it. Some call it spiritual, but you can see it as a psychological adaptive process. So when we talk about completeness or wholeness, what we're really talking about is a moving target. And if you really look at what health and wholeness is, it's having all these dimensions of yourself in equilibrium, in balance, and recognizing there is no place to get to, but we have an ability to adapt. So I want us to start thinking about health and wholeness as a verb, not as a destination, but a balancing act, more like surfing or skiing, the perfect run, the perfect wave. This is a thing in process, keeping your balance, being perceptive of the rays, your physical sense, your psychology, all of that. So here's my I want to say assumption, or my conclusion, is that the physical, the psychological, and the social get balanced. However, that balance is always tenuous, and there's a reaching involved. There's a reaching involved to not just understand the dimensions of our health, but also understand the completeness, how they create a wholeness of our soul. And this is very, very good for us. However, some people think they're there. I've known people who said I'm self-actualized. Well, maybe, Because when we look at humanistic psychology, the real issue is growth. Self-actualization doesn't mean you got somewhere. It means you got to a place where you are now able to adapt to the world, to appropriate the world, to make it part of yourself, to contextualize it within your own soul, and to be in relationship with it in a very real way. It has to do with being active on all these fronts: physical, emotional, social, psychological, spiritual, and intellectual, that you're alive on those and you're participating in them. And I'll be honest, I'd like to think I'm self-actualized, but I know I'm not. I like to think that I've got this wholeness thing down, but I know I don't. Because I know that it's about reaching. It's a process. And no matter where I am or how whole and complete, there's the next piece that makes it a higher order of completion. So all these interdependent aspects, balancing them, that creates health. And when you put all of that health within a context of the world, you get wholeness. And this is happening right now on a personal level to all of our listeners, to me and Marianne and Bob, and at a global level. We're trying to figure out what constitutes health and wholeness. You know, if you look at climate change, if you look at viruses, if you look at all the things that are going on the planet, what we can see very clearly is we're trying to understand what the wholeness of it is, the whole package. You know, how many species can we make obsolete before, things break down and the center no longer holds? Those are actually questions that environmentalists and ecologists are asking. We're asking that at a political level as the markets of the world break up, if you will, because that's pretty much what held the world together. Is the markets and economies and all that stuff. So here we are at health and wholeness. We've come from being to life to consciousness to self-awareness, and now we're trying to understand what constitutes true health and true wholeness. Now, I just laid out my shotgun blast of my understandings and my reaching. So I will say, before I ask my cohorts what they think, that wholeness is a reaching. It's never complete. It's an exponential thing where you keep getting closer and closer, but you're also growing. And that growing itself is itself a huge element in the wholeness piece and in the health piece. So health and wholeness. Bob, we'll start with you. What say you on this front?
Well, I'm with you most of the way. I think that this whole idea of homeostasis and reaching a balance is really the essence of health and wholeness. But again, homeostasis is a dynamic process. There's always something coming in from outside of the system that causes the system to go out of balance. The question then becomes, does the system have the tools, have the mechanisms to come back to balance in lieu of letting that external force keep driving it farther and farther away from it? And that's the question. Do we have the tools as individuals to bring ourselves back into balance? And that gets into a lot of psychological issues, a lot of physiological issues, a lot of neurological issues. And quite frankly, we have a lot of knowledge about those tools and how to use them. The question is, will we apply them? And unfortunately, I think there are just as many forces out there that are trying to get us not to apply those tools to come into balance for the benefit of whoever is in power, and using our imbalance as a way to maintain their power. And that's something that we as society have to grip. And find out how to negate those negative forces.
Amen.
And come back into balance.
Yeah, the disabling or the disrupting forces, because that's what they're doing. They're disrupting the flow. And I like the word dynamic. That's a better word than process. That it is an active thing, and there is no final solution. That's why I use the surfing metaphor, because I think we're each trying to adapt to a wave and keep our balance within the great cacophony of whatever the hell is happening here. Mary Ann, what say you?
Well, I agree with what you both have said, and I'm going to take a little bit of a different tack here. I think the idea of balance and homeostasis is right on, and we can't be healthy if we're out of balance, and our culture, our society can't be healthy. But when it comes to the idea of wholeness, I think, yes, we're all reaching for that, but it's something we already have. And I think that's what we're trying to find. We're trying to come back to, and I think there's a big movement now where we're trying to come back to our own inner wisdom. And your definition that you gave, I can't remember the person's name, but understanding and connecting to community and to yourself, and bringing it back to what we can do individually to create a healthy, not only a healthy self, but a healthy environment for others. And so I think that there's, and Bob, you talked about the tools that we need. And yes, we do need tools. We need to learn how to do this, because we are scattered and there are so many forces coming at us. And especially now, I mean, every time you turn around, there's another disaster. There's something else that's threatening us. And psychologically, it's wreaking havoc. And so how do you find some kind of wholeness within this scattered environment that we're in? So I think it's the challenge of our time. It's a challenge for all of us to kind of figure out how we can adapt to the world. You use that term, adapt to the world, because the world is changing. And if we can't adapt to it, we're not going to be healthy. So finding that balance.
Well, and one thing you said that I think is I don't think it's here yet, but I see it on the horizon, and that's that people are beginning to understand that they're complete in themselves. That there is, I don't want to use the word autonomy, but I can't think of another better word, that we each have enough of us inside to have this completeness. And I think as you were talking about holography, each piece has the whole in it from its own perspective. And these new understandings of wholeness and completeness and I am enoughness that is going to be to our best advantage. And there'll be people who play, like I think Bob, said it beautifully. People want to destabilize things because it's in the interest of their own personal interest. Their empathy hasn't yet opened up to the fuller picture. In other words, they're able to disrupt an understanding of wholeness for their own interests, but what they don't understand is the implications of that undermine their own interest at a larger order. And that's part of the education that I think the planet is going through. I think of what corruption is and how corruption has played a part in the past and how we have sought to mete out that corruption and how it keeps taking on a new iteration, and we have to find a new way of responding to that with real accountability. Go ahead, Bob.
I was just going to come back to this idea of self-sufficiency and I am all I need and this kind of stuff. I think that there's a real danger in that in the sense that it can go too far really easily and really quickly. We've got people now who think they know more than physicians because they know how to Google. They can find out everything they need. They don't need to take a vaccine because they Googled something and read, all vaccines are not effective. And they're going to take that idea and say, well, I'm good enough to do the research. I've done the research. And it's not only dangerous to themselves, it's dangerous to everybody if we don't find a way to pull back from that. Everybody's not self-sufficient. Everybody doesn't know everything. Everybody doesn't have all the answers.
And now we're getting to a larger understanding of completeness. A part of that wholeness is seeing you are part of something bigger, and you are interdependent, just as the organs are interdependent. It's not a closed loop, and that's what you're talking about, is how people close their loop and think that they are totally, it's not about being complete for them. It's about being right. And having the power of being correct and using that power to actually
it's abrogating the idea that they can think critically. And thinking critically requires evidence for whatever position you're taking. And you have to evaluate that evidence. And as soon as people say, well, I'm not going to listen to that evidence, whatever it may be, whether it's political, scientific, social, psychological, whatever, as soon as they say, well, I know better than all of this evidence out here. That's just...
Yeah.
That's
so
just
what you're talking about is one more way to not be whole. Go ahead, Mary Ann.
Right.
Well, and I was going to say, yeah, that's not wholeness. That is being closed-minded. But the idea that we are responsible, taking full responsibility for ourselves and not abdicating that responsibility to an external authority, an external force. And yes, we have, part of being whole understands that there is knowledge out there that we don't have, that others have. And being able to tap into another's knowledge base. That to me, that's different than what I can kind of see. We just said this is kind of an off example, but I just had an example of this very thing where somebody was prescribed a medication and they told the doctor that they were allergic to penicillin. They went to the pharmacy, didn't know what was ordered, went to the pharmacy, picked up the prescription. The pharmacist assured them that, no, this is okay if you're allergic to penicillin. Having an attorney in the family who does medical malpractice went, oh, wait, no, do not take that because you will have an anaphylactic shock. And so there's other people's knowledge. Sometimes they're not paying attention. And so it behooves us to be able to take responsibility and understand what it is that we are doing. But that's the knowledge base, and we have to rely on others' knowledge. We have to be able, we are interdependent. We're a community. And I think you talked about this in the beginning, that to be healthy, we have to be in a healthy community. And that means sharing and trusting. And what's happening in our world right now is that trust is broken down so much. So these people that are railing against this knowledge, they've lost trust. And so how do we get that back? How do we start to be able to understand we're interconnected, we're interdependent, and to me, that is part of being whole.
Amen.
And they're trusting the wrong people.
Yeah, and what you're talking about here, to get a bigger and broader perspective, is cliques. When I first came to the church, there were these little circles that would form, especially after church in the parking lot. And the cliques, the dogmas, and the cults, they create what you both are talking about, group think. In other words, once you get inside that closed loop, that defines your reality and what you're seeing. It becomes a lens. So what we're talking about is these things that impede wholeness. So how do we talk about what constitutes wholeness and health? And maybe the only way to do that is talk about pathology. My view is, the hierarchy of needs, Rogers, what's it called, non-judgmental way of listening, Alan Watts' unbelievable understanding of how East and West can filter into each other in some really good ways. All of those, we are the first generation to be in a global world. The Second World War was an amazing thing. It was really a war of factories. Whoever had the best factories and the most efficient factories, won. And that's why we won, and that's why Germany and Japan lost. And I would recommend going to Timeline on YouTube and just looking at all the short videos of how that lack of wholeness actually won the war by losing the war. And what we're seeing here in a democracy as self-ruled people is that everybody is a spark of it. Whatever the light is, we each have a spark, and we each have a say in it. And that's why, and this goes back to what both of you are saying, why education is so important, and why the first fascist piece has to do with education. If we can control what people learn. I have a friend, and I don't know if I should say this, but I haven't been to his party in years. He keeps inviting me, and maybe I should say the reason I don't go is because I don't go where I'm censored. He has a clause in the invitation, and of course we won't talk about religion or politics. Well, that cuts me out of any conversation.
Yeah. Well,
although it's kind of refreshing to be away from that at times.
Yes.
So sorry, go ahead, Bob.
Well, yeah, it doesn't have to be an edict, but it can be you can have a spirit of the gathering that's a little lighter. But if something comes up, it ought to be allowed to happen. But what I was going to say is that this education thing is so important. I'm down here in Florida in the middle of a fascist re-education campaign that is very negatively affecting the school systems from kindergarten all the way through graduate schools and in universities. People are leaving the state. People are educators are leaving the profession because of this, because of the muzzling of the truth in education and having it replaced by ideology. And it is so dangerous, and it is something that if we don't get a handle on it very soon, and I'm saying very soon in terms of, some years, but we'll be to the point when nobody remembers what really happened in history. The only thing that they'll know is what they were told by the people in power.
I want us to try to stay, we're almost out of time, focused on what is health and wholeness. And what we've done is we've kind of given it some relief of what it is by talking about the darkness that isn't it. And that can be helpful. However, I want our listeners to be empowered for their own health and wholeness. I want teachers in Florida to stay there and be willing to get fired and go to jail for their free speech. I want people to...
I'd rather see the governor go to jail.
Well, that's true. And the fact is, unless people like you and me, because I gave to DeSantis, the guy who was running against him, or the woman, I can't remember who it was, until we start giving part of our money to them to give them power, because money's power. What did someone say on Fareed? He's got a big voice and a lot of money to say it. You have to have the money piece, and we either participate in that or we don't, and that's something that we each have to decide for ourselves. And I think that's why, Bob, I'm not a cynic, because I go to these things. We're going to have a party for, by the way, Marianne, I'll be asking you to this for, I know you're in the Valley, but for Lisa Brown to be our new mayor. We're going to do a party for her and have her in and talk and all that stuff. But I think that the whole key to this is people waking up. Woke right now is bad mouth. But basically, it's the sleepwalkers and sleep talkers who are screaming at the woke people because they didn't stay asleep. And there's storytelling there. I think, Bob, before this podcast, you talked about the courts. That's where we can maybe see some reconciling of some of the stuff that's going on. Wholeness is something that is part and parcel of us. It's a new understanding. I mean, again, before my generation, all the globes had countries on them. And every 2 or 3 years, you get a new globe with new countries drawn because people were fighting and all that stuff. We're the first generation to see the planet without the geopolitical boundaries. We're the first to see the planet as one whole interdependent happening. These are new understandings, and what we're experiencing now, and all the things you've both talked about that are impeding wholeness and health for the sake of personal power, for the sake of pettiness, I don't know, for all those reasons, that's a reaction formation to this understanding that is trying to emerge in the human family of health and wholeness. And that's in my view. And we're slowly getting there. Climate change is definitely a wake-up call. I think the virus stuff, and virus doesn't care about geopolitical boundaries. There's different things that are now showing that we're all part of the same thing. And it might take a nuclear outburst for us to wake up to the next piece, to not be asleep. I'm not sure. But I can say this. Time is short, and we're about out of it. So, final comments? Marianne, how about you? Final comments on health and wholeness?
Well, I think you made a really good point that we are part of a single wholeness, that we are all part of something. And what do we do with our part? And that's the whole idea. I mean, so many of us, myself included, tend to self-destruct. We do things that are not healthy for us. We do things that are not in our own best interest sometimes. And so how do we correct that process? And I think cynicism won't get us there. I think we have to create some kind of a hopefulness that it is possible for us to find that center, to find the wholeness, and to understand that we each have a part to play in that. And it begins with us. And I always go back to this, because if we're looking for outside systems and other people to fix the problems in the world, then we're part of that problem because we're not doing our part. And so it becomes this continual striving for our own healthiness and wholeness, and then we can affect the external.
Amen.
So.
Bob, final comments?
Well, again, I think it gets back to education, and the specific part of education is teaching people to think critically, teaching people to deal with the avalanche of information that comes to each of us every day, every moment in this world. There's so much information coming to us. We have to have the tools, the critical thinking tools that allow us to evaluate that information and make an informed decision about what is real and what is not in the world. And until we are able to use those tools, we can't operate effectively. But the tools are there. We know how to do it. It's just a question of implementing them. And it starts in kindergarten. It starts with teaching our children to think critically.
Amen. Amen. And we're in a place where we have to understand something. We've got to sort it out. And I think that's part of what Bob's saying. Also, Marianne, what you were saying is whatever's going on, it's one single inordinate happening, and we're all part of it. And we're trying to learn what that single inordinate thing is, of which all the other things are parts, and how do we move in accord with it. I think those are important issues. But where do we go from here? What is this single inordinate happening? What is the universe? What is the real language of nature? Is it poetry and song? Is it some kind of theater? Is it some kind of matrix? Or maybe, as the computer people said, is it binary? And people are actually reducing the whole universe to a binary system of zeros and ones. And now something new is happening. It's called quantum computers. You see, binary can go up and down and right and left, but quantum computers can go all directions at once. It's a very different language. So we're starting to see, is the language of the universe a quantum language? And what is quantum? Well, quantum is basically saying it's one single happening, inordinate happening. And we're going to go there. We're going to look at what are the languages of nature and how do we talk about nature. I mean, I love poetry. I love dance. I think the universe is excellent in those expressions. But quantum, whoa, what a trip. Until then, my friends, be healthy, reach for wholeness, and in all things, know that you are one and blessed.